Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the murder of this father of three prompts a review of the system allowing some prisoners to live at home wearing a tag. Plans for a third runway at Heathrow are approved by the UK government. We look at the implications for flights in Scotland. If you get a free car parking space at work, how would you feel about paying tax on it? That's the proposal from a campaign group. We're still sending over 60,000 tonnes of plastic to landfill, and it's costing councils millions of pounds. And will he be well for Wimbledon? Andy Murray's race to return to fitness after a hip operation. Good evening. Why was a man who'd been ordered back to prison because he'd broken his tagging conditions allowed to remain free to kill? The Justice Secretary has ordered a review of the home tagging system after James Wright murdered a young father in Paisley 6 months after he should have been recalled to prison. Our Home Affairs correspondent Rival Alderson has the background to the story.
31-year-old Craig McClelland, a father of three, was stabbed in a random and unprovoked attack in Paisley in July last year. There's been outrage after it was revealed in court yesterday his killer, who'd been released from prison early and then broke tagging conditions, hadn't been recalled to jail. James Wright was yesterday sentenced to life imprisonment and told he must serve a minimum of 20 years. Wright has 2 previous convictions for knife carrying. The second of these was in October 2016. He was jailed for 21 months, his 16th conviction overall. Almost 4 months later, he was released early from Low Moss Prison on what's called home detention curfew on a tag. But after 11 days, he tampered with his tag and the prison ordered him to be recalled to jail. But police never arrested him, and almost 6 months after he'd been freed, he murdered Craig McClelland. At the High Court yesterday, the judge, Lord Matthews, said questions would be asked about that. And today the Justice Secretary told MSPs he was asking the inspectors of prisons and constabulary to carry out a joint review. He told the Justice Committee what he'd be wanting them to examine.
Whether there are further aspects that can be improved in how they make assessments in determining whether someone should be provided with home detention curfew. And secondly, to look at whether there are ways in which the police process for investigating such breaches and apprehending individuals who have breached a HDC, that they are brought to account and apprehended.
Opposition parties said the circumstances of Craig's death raised serious questions which his family would want answered.
This appears to be a function of the SNP's soft-touch approach to justice. This is about the SNP emptying prisons and taking a presumption that people should be on the outside rather in prison where they're being punished.
We're at a point in time where the Scottish Government's looking at expanding the use of electronic tagging and potentially using these sorts of orders more. Now, if we're going to have confidence in this sort of measure, it's vital that any breaches of orders such as this are followed up swiftly, promptly and robustly.
Well, I was encouraged by what the Justice Secretary had to say to the Justice Committee this morning. He has, to my mind, quite sensibly ordered a review, not just by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, but also Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons. There are serious questions to answer, both from the prison service and from the response by the police in due course.
Craig's family, who attended court, gave victim impact statements explaining what his loss meant to them. His partner Stacey said she had to watch their 3 sons in pain, crying, asking questions she couldn't answer because of what the judge called Wright's bloodlust. Rival Alderson, Reporting Scotland.
The UK government's decision to back a new runway at Heathrow Airport will, in the words of its Transport Secretary, help connect Scotland to the world. Well, the Scottish Government also supports the expansion. Our reporter Stephen Godden is at Edinburgh Airport this evening. So, Stephen, what impact could the development have here?
Well, Jackie, Edinburgh is one of 4 Scottish airports offering flights to and from Heathrow. And in recent years, the last decade or so, the relationship with the UK's largest airport could be characterised by, I suppose, what you'd call a squeeze. The bosses at Heathrow have favoured the more lucrative, longer haul routes over the shorter domestic ones. So there's been less space for Scottish flights. Now, what could a third runway mean for that? Well, UK ministers this morning were talking in very positive terms. They were saying that more capacity could mean more choice for passengers, and it could mean greater competition, which could lead to lower fares. It could also, in time, mean more routes. Prestwick, for example, which doesn't currently offer flights to Heathrow, they now say that that is a key target. Well, this afternoon at Prestwick, here's what passengers made of the idea.
Well, anywhere you can fly from here is a bonus, if you can fly direct from Prestwick.
Yeah, I mean, we stay about 10 minutes away from the airport, so it would be perfect if we could fly to other destinations to here.
I think that would be great. Yeah, it would be great for, obviously, for locals more than ourselves that are heading abroad as such.
Well, in some ways it's a good idea, because obviously it's a bit handier for us in the west of Scotland, but I don't think it's great for Heathrow. I think they've got enough pollution and congestion down there without adding much more to it.
Well, the Scottish Government have reiterated their support. They've already signed that memorandum of understanding over the jobs and investment that they believe it will create. What they want now is detail, particularly on how these slots for Scotland would be guaranteed. Now, that's what many in the business community say is vital to ensure that Scotland gets the maximum benefit from this.
We know from when the flights was reintroduced to Heathrow just a couple of years ago, the impact that's had in terms of visitor numbers and the ease of businesses accessing international markets. New capacity will mean additional flights to airports like Inverness and others across the country, better connectivity, more visitors, greater economic impact.
But Stephen, not everyone is in favour of this.
No, that's right. The former UK Transport Secretary, Justine Greening, she said in an interview this morning that a third runway could mean that Scottish routes lose their viability, although it must be said it doesn't seem that that's an idea that's got much traction with our Tory colleagues in Scotland. Edinburgh Airport, for their part, they say that they're not convinced a third runway will happen, but their owners also own Gatwick, who it must be remembered were behind a rival expansion bid. Well, what happens next? There will be a vote in Parliament. Beyond that, it's likely it could end up in the courts. And then, of course, the huge construction task of building this third runway. So lots of obstacles still to be overcome, but they say the aim is to have planes on that runway by the end of 2025.
Stephen Godden, thank you. A medical tribunal has found that a Dundee doctor whose actions resulted in a baby being decapitated during delivery is able to return to work. Yesterday, Dr. Vishnevi Laxman was found to have made an error of judgment by choosing a natural delivery for a pregnant mother over a caesarean section. Our health correspondent, Lisa Summers, is at the General Medical Council in Edinburgh, and a warning again that some of the facts in this case are distressing. Lisa.
Jackie, it is the GMC who are based in this building behind me who brought the case against Dr. Laxman. Her tribunal has been going on in Manchester for a number of weeks now. And just a reminder of the background of this, we know that Dr. Laxman was a senior consultant based at Nine Wells Hospital when she was called out to see a pregnant patient who was in a critical condition. Now, staff were preparing to carry out an emergency caesarean section, but when Dr. Laxman arrived, she opted for a normal delivery. Well, that had catastrophic results, with the baby decapitated while Dr. Laxman was trying to deliver it. Now, what the tribunal have been doing today is considering the facts of the case, and they have decided that because this was an isolated incident, because of the unusual circumstances, the emergency situation, and also Dr. Laxman's personal beliefs, that the outcome was not reasonably foreseeable. Therefore, they've decided that her actions were negligent but didn't amount to misconduct, and therefore she should be allowed to carry on practicing without any further sanction. Dr. Laxman now works in India, but they did conclude by saying that nothing should detract from the fact that she made a significant error of judgment, and that has had serious consequences and a significant impact on the patient.
Lisa Summers, thank you very much. If you use a free car parking space at work, how would you feel about paying tax on it? Well, that's one of the proposals from a leading campaign group hoping to influence the Scottish Government's forthcoming transport bill. Here's our transport correspondent, David Henderson.
The daily commute, a journey made by millions of Scots. But how many people take their car when they could use a greener alternative? The Scottish Government plans to overhaul the transport system, and campaigners say it's time for action to persuade car drivers to take the bus, tram and train instead.
Evidence from cities around the world that have actually changed the way that people travel shows that not only have they made those alternatives better, so they've made cycling better, they've made buses better, they've made public transport in general better, but they've also made it a little bit more difficult and a little bit more expensive to drive your car. And workplace parking levy, or parking levies, is one possible way to do that.
It's already happening in Nottingham. There, a parking levy's raised millions of pounds which have been spent on the tram and train service.
This tram is for Towson Lane.
The council says more people are now using public transport and fewer are going by car.
It's actually reduced the congestion within the city. It's made a lot more people use public transport, and we've now got a very good public transport system where about 40% of people commuting to work using it.
In Nottingham, bigger employers have to pay the council just over £400 a year for each staff car parking space. It's then for the employers to decide if they will bear the cost or whether they will pass it on to the people who work there. Few drivers want to pay more to get to and from their work, and motoring groups say extra charges won't guarantee better public transport.
The fundamental problem we have is that anything that's an extra tax on drivers in Scotland, they already feel overtaxed. There's no way they can be compensated for by reducing other taxes, so it just ends up an extra charge for motoring in Scotland.
The Scottish Government hasn't said yes to this plan, but hasn't yet said no, as it weighs up what blend of carrot and stick is required to persuade more people out of their cars. David Henderson, reporting Scotland.
A 20-year-old man has died after falling from a ladder at Bearsden railway station. The emergency services were called shortly before 10 this morning after reports a worker had been seriously injured. British Transport Police said the man died despite the efforts of paramedics at the scene. The incident isn't being treated as suspicious. The station has now reopened. A primary school in Ayrshire has been closed after a major fire overnight. Education officials said Ballantrae Primary School was likely to be closed for the foreseeable future. Plans to extend free personal care to under 65s with degenerative conditions have been backed by Holyrood's Health Committee. It follows a campaign by former Dundee United footballer Frank Coppell and his widow Amanda. He was diagnosed with early onset dementia aged 59 and had to pay for his care until he died aged 65, just weeks after he qualified for free personal care. Known as Frank's Law, the changes are due to come into force from April next year. Around £11 million is being wasted in Scotland because plastic is being sent to landfill rather than being recycled. That's according to an environmental pressure group which says much of that plastic ends up littering our streets or causing damage to wildlife. Our environment correspondent Kevin Keane reports.
Every day of every year we produce rubbish in vast quantities. More than half of it's recycled, but 64,000 tonnes of plastic is not. Instead, it's going to landfill. You might not realise, but it actually costs councils huge amounts of money to bury that waste. Campaigners say that's perverse, when the plastic in particular could be making money.
That material is worth £5 and a bit million. So if we put it in the recycling bin, we could get £5 and a bit million for that. If we put it in the general waste bin, we're actually going to get charged £5 and a bit million to have that buried in the ground, and it's not going to get used again. So actually we've got an £11 million gap here.
This is where it could be coming instead. This recycling centre in Aberdeen separates and sells the stuff we don't put in our general waste bins. From paper and cardboard to metals, plastic and glass, it all has a value. And we're binning 27 kilograms of that plastic per home. So what's going wrong?
Every household in Scotland is producing their share of that, so that's a lot we could all be doing better. Sometimes it's about confusion. Sometimes people don't know exactly which plastics they can recycle, and so they're actually throwing away things into the landfill bin that could be recycled. Sometimes it's laziness, but often it's just we're not quite sure, we don't quite get round to it.
They have to share the ocean with plastic.
We do seem to be doing more, with recycling rates at 61% of our total rubbish in 2016. And that was before Blue Planet 2 showed marine life sharing the oceans with plastic. These images have already led to massive changes. But there's still a long way to go, and environmental groups say we all have to do our bit. Kevin Keane reporting Scotland.
It's 16 minutes to 7, a reminder of tonight's main story. The murder of this father of 3 prompts a review of the system allowing some prisoners to live at home wearing a tag. And still to come, will he be well for Wimbledon? Andy Murray's race to return to fitness after a hip operation. A nun has admitted abusing children at Catholic care homes in Aberdeen and Lasswade near Edinburgh 50 years ago. The 77-year-old, who can't be named for legal reasons, said she hit them if they misbehaved and force-fed them. But she's denied other allegations. Maura Kinneber reports.
The nun admitted she hit girls in her care, sometimes with a brush. She said she'd lose her temper, and when the girls misbehaved, she would punch or slap them. Sometimes she would pull their hair, and she dragged one along a corridor. She denied a series of other allegations of child abuse.
The abuse took place at Nazareth House in Aberdeen during the 1960s and 70s. She said another, more senior nun would shout at the children, slap and force-feed them too. Another nun, Sister Bridget Cunningham, who waived her anonymity, said she didn't see or hear any violence there then. She said the nuns were very kind, the children well behaved and happy.
The nun who admitted child abuse said she was truly sorry and expressed her deep regret. She said she hoped that would go some way to ease the pain and hurt caused. The inquiry continues. Maura Kinneber reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
A 58-year-old man has been charged after customs officers seized 3.6 million suspected illicit cigarettes in North Lanarkshire. Police discovered the haul in a container at a business address in Gartcosh. HM Revenue and Customs officers confiscated the cigarettes, which are worth an estimated £1.3 million in lost duty and taxes. The Scottish Government has stepped in to safeguard the ruins of a seminary in Cardross after an arts organisation trying to save the structure went out of business. The company had intended to rescue St Peter's College building by turning it into the country's first modernist ruin. They say plans have been shelved because they were too ambitious and risky. The Culture Secretary says she has asked Historic Environment Scotland to consider long-term options for the site, which was built as a training college for Catholic priests in the 1960s. Andy Murray says he still hopes to play Wimbledon next month, although he admits his recovery from hip surgery has been slow and frustrating. The former world #1 hasn't played a competitive match since last year's championships at the All England Club. Cerridon Idison reports.
A sight for sore eyes. Andy Murray back on the practice court, fighting for his career. He hasn't played since last year's Wimbledon and admits the road to recovery is much longer than he thought.
It's been very slow. I've been now getting close to a year now, which is a lot longer than I think me and any of my team kind of expected at the beginning. But I'm getting closer to playing again. I've started training a few days ago and hoping to make my comeback during the grass court season.
The last time Andy Murray played a tennis match in the UK was here at Glasgow's Hydro Arena back in November when he took on Roger Federer for charity. After that, the former world #1 had to withdraw from January's Australian Open before having hip surgery that month. He had hoped to recover in time to play in a tournament in Glasgow at the end of April, or failing that, one in Loughborough in mid-May. He missed both and is now struggling to be fit for Wimbledon next month, although he's not giving up.
I'm hoping I'll be there, but Roger Federer has obviously got a phenomenal record on grass. He's won I think 7 times at Wimbledon, so he'd definitely be up there as one of the favourites. And you never know. It depends a little bit on the draw.
Yeah! That's it. Title #4.
Another draw Murray might make this summer is at London's Queen's Club. 5 times a winner there, it's the traditional curtain raiser to Wimbledon and might be the most realistic option for his return to the tour. They get underway there a week on Monday. Wimbledon is just under 4 weeks away. Twice a champion at the All England Club, it's now a race against time to see if Andy Murray can even take part there this year. Kerry Nidsan, reporting Scotland.
Memories. One of Scottish athletics' longest-standing records has been broken. Sandra Seenan set the time of just under 23 seconds in the 200 metres at the Los Angeles Olympics, and it stood for 34 years. Until now. More from David Curry.
A metaphorical stroll down memory lane for one of the quickest Scotswomen ever. In 1984, Sandra Seenan, then Sandra Whittaker, was racing in the quarter-finals of the 200 metres at the Los Angeles Olympics.
4 go through. On the inside, Briscoe Hooks closing up. Angela Bailey going quite well, and Sandra Whittaker fighting off.
She missed out on a place in the semi-finals, but set a new Scottish record. It stood for nearly 3.5 decades. At the weekend, Loughborough-based athlete Beth Dobin broke it, and Sandra wanted to congratulate her in person, but almost.
Hi.
Hi Beth, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Are you?
Yeah, fine, thanks. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Lovely to speak to you.
I felt slightly emotional over the weekend because actually, obviously, with the record gone, I thought, oh, that's my record, it's gone. But absolutely delighted for yourself.
The past few days have just been so busy, but today I've just sat down and thought, wow, I've broken a record that's stood for 34 years, so it's just an absolute crazy feeling.
I wish you every success, Beth, and I certainly will be following you from here on in and watching your career, and I'm sure you'll improve time on time.
Definitely going forward, I would like to even lower the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, just take it from there.
Excellent. Lovely speaking to you. Congratulations again and bye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks to you too.
Sandra's record is gone, but the memories live on. David Curry, reporting Scotland.
Well, a bit further back in time now, you don't need to be a naval historian to have heard of Mutiny on the Bounty. There have been many books and some great movies made about the events on a ship in the South Seas in 1789. Well, a gun believed to be from HMS Bounty is to be sold at auction in Dumfries. Willie Johnson takes up the story.
The good ship HMS Bounty again sails the sea.
For more than 300 years, the story of the mutiny in the Bounty has held enduring appeal, not least to Hollywood movie makers who commissioned this replica.
The three-masted vessel was the setting for the most famous mutiny in history.
The real Bounty was seized by disaffected crewmen led by Fletcher Christian, unhappy with their treatment by the ship's captain William Bligh. They cast Captain Bligh adrift in an open boat on the South Pacific and sailed the Bounty to Pitcairn Island, where she later sank. HMS Bounty was armed with 4 4-pound guns. 2 of them are still on Pitcairn Island and 1 on nearby Norfolk Island. But what about the 4th? Well, in all probability, it's right here in Dumfries. This gun was gifted to the captain of another ship, the Oriala, in Pitcairn in 1898, along with a letter signed by the island's president, the great-grandson of one of the original mutineers.
This gun was picked up in Bounty Bay, where she was wrecked in 1789.
The Oriala belonged to a UK shipping company, whose owner bought Little Cumbria Island in the Firth of Clyde in 1913 and took the gun there. After Little Cumbria was bought in 1960 by a Scottish businessman, the late Peter Kay, the gun went to his home in Galloway. His estate is now being sold.
We see lots of very unusual things, but this HMS Bounty gun is definitely one of the most exciting and unusual items I've had the pleasure of bringing to auction.
I would like it to stay somewhere near the sea. It started off its life on the sea, it spent a big chunk of its life in the sea, and since it was raised, it's never been more than half a mile from the sea.
The gun is expected to fetch £5,000 to £10,000 when it comes under the hammer on Saturday. Anything more than that, a welcome bounty. Willie Johnston, reporting Scotland, Dumfries.
Well, let's get the weather now from Christopher.
Jackie, thank you.
Hello there, good evening to you. Well, plenty of sunshine for many of us again today. This is the scene in Glasgow this afternoon, and this is the scene in South Lanarkshire. But it wasn't blue skies everywhere. Here's a satellite picture. You'll see we've had some stubborn cloud towards parts of Argyll, in towards parts of the Hebrides, although thinning and breaking all the while. However, under that cloud, a little bit grey at times, but despite those grey skies, still dry. And it stays dry through the course of this evening and overnight. That cloud still with us in the southwest and rebuilding around these North Sea coasts, drifting inland at times. Perhaps the odd spot of drizzle through the borders, but generally it is dry. Temperatures there around 7 to 11 Celsius in towns and cities, cooler in the countryside. Tomorrow, high pressure with us again, so another dry and settled day. Some sunshine, some cloud, and certainly a cloudier day probably across parts of the southeast. Edinburgh, through the Lothians and the borders. The cloud here could be stubborn to clear. Elsewhere, though, it will thin and break. So if you wake up to fairly cloudy skies, it will improve to something much brighter by afternoon. And in the sunshine, once again, feeling warm, 20, 21 Celsius. The chance of the odd isolated shower, but it will be isolated. Pretty much all of us having a dry and sunny day. A little more cloud through the Minches at times, perhaps the odd spot of drizzle, but generally, as I say, dry. Come further east, a little bit cooler. 15, 16 degrees at times, because we still have that north-northeast breeze. So certainly in the shade, it's going to feel almost chilly at times. But further west, the temperatures, as I say, up to around 20 or 21. And then to end Wednesday, dry and clear. And it stays dry and clear, looking ahead to Thursday. In fact, probably the warmest day of the week. Some patchy cloud around at times, particularly towards the west coast and for Shetland. But for the mainland, temperatures around 17 to 22, maybe 23 Celsius. Friday, another dry one. Perhaps some thicker cloud towards the east coast, the odd spot of rain or drizzle. But for most of us, dry with some sunshine. That's the forecast for now.
Thank you, Christopher. And now a reminder of tonight's main news. The Justice Secretary has ordered a review of the home tagging system after a young father was murdered in Paisley by a man who should have been recalled to prison 6 months earlier. And the government has given the go-ahead to build a third runway at Heathrow. And that's Reporting Scotland. Good evening.